the kind of thing the Nazis did, that we put them on trial for war crimes at Nuremberg. And our own government was doing these sorts of things. People that tick the box that they accept the theory of evolution is true. If you ask them, how do you think it works? How does natural selection work to create the evolution of species? Most people have no idea. They offer some Lamarckian explanation. Oh, the giraffe stretches its neck and the longer neck gets passed down to the offspring. No, that's incorrect. I've talked to a lot of 9/11 truthers, and oh boy, they absolutely think George W. Bush was involved. And this is like the worst murder of American civilians in history.
I don't consider myself a conspiracy theorist, but for some reason I'm really fascinated by the subject. After going down another rabbit hole trying to figure out why people believe in crazy ideas, I ran into Michael Shermer's TED Talk about it. I loved it. I then looked up his interviews on Larry King, Joe Rogan, Charlie Rose, and other podcasts, and soon ordered his book called Conspiracy, which was awesome. So of course I invited Dr. Shermer to be on the Oxen to dig deeper into his book. And lately I've been binge watching the Michael Shermer Show, a podcast where he interviews top scientists, scholars, and thinkers, which is simply remarkable. Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Robert Cialdini, Jordan Peterson, Michio Kaku. The list of his guests goes on, so you better check it out. But before we start with this interview, I'd like to ask you for a quick favor. Please subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments section, and let's continue growing this community together. What was the first recorded conspiracy theory?
Well, I would say the burning of Rome, probably, at least major conspiracy theory that we know about, in which Nero was accused of either making it happen on purpose, MIHOP, or letting it happen on purpose, LIHOP. These terms are from 9/11 Truth conspiracy theorists. To what extent George W. Bush either knew about 9/11 before it happened, he therefore let it happen on purpose, or he was actually engaged in the orchestration of the conspiracy to bring down the World Trade Center buildings as a pretense to go into war and so on, false flag operation, therefore he made it happen on purpose, MIHOP. So that's what Nero was accused of. My take on all this, like I outline in the book, is what I call cowhop, capitalized on what happened on purpose. That is to say, things do happen randomly or by other people that are not inside jobs and so on. And then politicians take advantage of what happened on purpose. That is, they capitalized on what happened on purpose to their own political ends. And both the left and the right do this. It's not that Republicans or Democrats are more or less likely to do either one of those. It's just that when things happen, like my example is when President Roosevelt wanted to get the United States into the Second World War to support Great Britain, the American First coalition was pretty powerful, and he couldn't convince Congress and the American people that getting entangled in yet another European war was a good idea until Pearl Harbor. Now, when Pearl Harbor happened, then everybody was, of course, engaged and mobilized to get involved in the war, and Roosevelt had no trouble at all getting the United States involved. So, but he didn't, and there were conspiracy theories. He knew it was going to happen he let it happen on purpose, or he made it happen on purpose. Neither, but he capitalized on what happened on purpose, and that's normally what happens.
It's funny. We're like 2 minutes in. We've already discussed 3 conspiracy theories. that's
yes.
crazy.
Well, because they're everywhere. I mean, you can't ignore them. That's why I wrote the book. It's like, wow, it's time somebody laid out a theoretical model to explain how to think about conspiracy theories. So that's what I attempt to do.
So how do you define conspiracy theory?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. It's important to make a distinction between conspiracies and conspiracy theories. Conspiracies, or a conspiracy, is 2 or more people plotting in secret to do something to a third party that's illegal or immoral without their knowledge or consent. And a conspiracy theory is a theory about that. Whether it's true or not, that's a separate question. And a conspiracist is somebody who thinks that there is a conspiracy afoot and has a conspiracy theory about that conspiracy, again, whether or not it's true.
Is it like typical profile of people who fall for them?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on this. There's an actual large body of scholarship studied by scholars, historians, political scientists, psychologists, and so on, who study conspiracy theories and who believes them. So demographically, like say politically, there's no difference between liberals and conservatives on who is more or less likely to be engaged in conspiracy theorizing. Usually, it's the losing party that is whatever party loses the election, they think the other party somehow cheated or there was some shenanigans in the election or so on. That is common throughout history. The difference with the 2020 election is that Trump never conceded. Normally, politicians concede at some point after they can theorize about what was really going on to cause them to lose the election. And then they give up, concede, and then move on to the next election. So what Trump did was different. I mean, he kept it alive. I mean, this was literally a one-man conspiracy theory, the rigged election 2020 conspiracy theory. Had he not promoted that, had he just conceded to Joe Biden and said, "Oh, darn, I lost. Well, I'm coming back in 2024, and let's focus on that," nobody would have promoted the conspiracy theory. Nobody. It was a one-man operation. And from there, it becomes what I call a tribal conspiracism. Well, our tribe, the boss said so, so I got to believe it. And most people, they don't really know what's true on these sorts of things. It's hard to fact check. How would I know what shenanigans might have been happening in Arizona or Georgia with the 2020 election? I wouldn't even know who to call, right? So we depend on our authorities, people in power who do know, right? So when Attorney General Bill Barr said, well, I turned the resources of the Department of Justice to look into the claims that the election was rigged, and we didn't find anything, nothing. I thought, well, then that's it. That's over. And he's a Republican. He supported Trump. He voted for Trump, twice and so on. And he said there's nothing to it. So that was pretty much the end of that. Again, had Trump just dropped it, there would have been no conspiracy theory. Then there's race. Again, there's no difference in race in terms of who's more or less likely to be into conspiracy theories, but it does target your conspiracy theory. So, for example, Blacks Americans are more likely to think that there was a conspiracy afoot by the FBI or the CIA or the U.S. government to plant crack cocaine in inner city Black communities, or invented AIDS to decimate the Black communities, and so on. White Americans are more likely to think that the government's conspiring to take away their Second Amendment rights, confiscate their guns, building FEMA camps for gun owners, and so on. So the race just it kind of nudges you toward one conspiracy theory or another. Intelligence and education play a small role. Say postgraduate degree people versus high school diplomas are less likely to believe in conspiracy theories, but not by a huge amount. It's still like 1 in 5 people with a postgraduate degree think there many conspiracy theories are real. So, that's 20%. That's not a trivial amount. And the reason is because it really doesn't have anything to do with intelligence or education. It has to do with that many conspiracy theories have a kind of rationality behind them, in as much as a lot of conspiracies are real. Conspiracy theories turn out to be true because there really are conspiracies, right? And so there's a kind of rationality to thinking that some of them are real, even if they're not all real.
I remember some time ago, I read, there was another author saying, a lot of times people who fall for conspiracy theories are the ones who not satisfied with their lives. And it's basically believe in the conspiracy, give them a sense of they know something that others don't. But I don't think that's what you say in your book. I think you basically
well, that is a factor, a small factor. That doesn't particularly affect any one kind of person demographically. It's an underlying current to a lot of them. That is, it's entertaining, it's engaging, it engages the moral impulse. Like there's something going on, and I'm in on it. I've discovered what this thing is. Oh my God, the deep state or QAnon or JFK or 9/11 or the Obama birthers, whatever. People get very emotionally engaged in these sorts of beliefs. In other words, it's not just an intellectual process. They feel very passionate about it, that this is something that's real. It's important. It's huge. I'm in on it. I get to be involved in what could be a historical game-changing discovery, and I'm going to expose the truth about this conspiracy that's really going on. And so when I meet these people, I can tell not only do they really believe, they believe passionately. And you could see this in the videos on January 6th insurrection. We know who all 700 plus people are because they posted on social media and they've been arrested and interviewed and profiled and so on. And these were not tinfoil hat wearing wackadoodle people living in their parents' basement. These were normal people with jobs, careers, families, and so on. But they went there because the boss told them they're stealing your country. Let's not let that happen. Well, if you really believe that's not completely crazy to go to the Capitol to do something about it, whatever that was. Not clear to me, or probably even to them, what they were going to do once they got in the building. So you take over the government, and then what? You're gonna hold votes. What are you going to do? Pass legislation? I mean, okay, so most of them in there just walking around taking selfies and being super excited about being in on this big movement. What they were going to do after that, who knows? But you could definitely see the passion in that, and that's true for most conspiracy. I've talked to a lot of 9/11 truthers, and oh boy, they absolutely think George W. Bush was involved, and this is like the worst murder of American civilians in history. Worse than Pearl Harbor. And by our own government. This is a horrific crime. You thought Watergate was bad. This is way worse. And we are going to expose it, right?
And typically there is something in there, right? There is some ground which they focus on maybe there are some unanswered questions.
Yeah. There's usually an element of truth to these things. That is, government agencies, corporations, powerful politicians, rich corporate leaders, they often do things behind the scenes to make things happen to their benefit that you and I can't do. We don't have that kind of power or money or pull. And so it's not irrational to be suspicious of anyone who has a lot of power, a lot of pull, a lot of money. This is why Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and George Soros and the Koch brothers and so on are always targeted as doing something. Well, because they are doing things. Usually it's out in the open. We're there. It's like the George Soros is funding some liberal politicians. Well, the Koch brothers fund conservative politicians, but it's not a conspiracy because it's right out in the open. They brag about it. They deduct the donation on their tax returns, right? It's not a secret. But with 9/11. So this is what we call anomaly hunting. The moment you look into anything that happened in history in great detail, you are going to find anomalies, just weird things that happen. My favorite example from the JFK assassination conspiracy theory is the umbrella man. So across from the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza, standing out there on the grassy field, is this guy with an umbrella. Louis Witt is his name, W-I-T-T Witt. And we know because he later came forward and said, I'm the umbrella man, right? There was these photos and you could see, what's that guy doing with an umbrella? It's a sunny day out. There's no weather forecast for rain, nothing. What's he doing with that umbrella? Aha, the umbrella was a weapon. Maybe it was some sort of a dart gun and he fired at Kennedy and on and on and on. He later, like a decade later, said, hey, that was me. It wasn't a weapon. It's just an umbrella as a sign of protest against the Kennedy family because the senior Kennedy, the patriarch, Joseph Kennedy, was a supporter of Lindbergh and the American Firsters and isolationists. He kind of was, doing business with Germany before the war, and he sort of embraced this capitulation to Hitler when he was making his moves in the 1930s. And so this guy, Witt, did not like the Kennedy family. So he was protesting JFK coming to town by having his umbrella, because the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously was holding his umbrella and he got off the plane, and he's got the signed document. Harry Hitler himself promised he wouldn't take any more land. Here it is, peace in our time and all that stuff. Appeasement obviously was not a good idea with Hitler. So that's what Witt was doing, right? So then you go, oh, okay, so the umbrella man, another anomaly solved. what about the lady with the weird dress? And what about this and that? And every conspiracy theory has these anomalies. RFK, there was the lady in the flower dress. What was she doing? And 9/11 is filled with these things, just dozens. It's like, how do you make sense of it? So, and the answer is you don't have to do anything with those anomalies. No theory in science or history explains every single thing that happened. All we can do is make an approximate estimate of what happened, and there was always going to be unexplained anomalies. So, so we have to look at the preponderance of evidence for any of those claims.
You discussed several of these conspiracy theories in your book, but the 9/11 one was kind of interesting. That is it Building 7 that was had a lot of questions.
Yes, anomalies, right? Yeah. Well, there you're getting a distorted picture because the truthers will say, "Oh, look at this picture of Building 7. It was hardly damaged at all. How is it that it collapsed?" Well, they're only showing you the backside that wasn't damaged from the collapse of the two World Trade Center buildings. On the other side, it was severely damaged. And it burned all day. And, there was no surprise that it collapsed. And the question was when. Once the two World Trade Center buildings collapsed earlier in the morning, the New York Fire Department knew, well, this is going to happen. So we got to do the best we can to slow it, the inevitable collapse, and make sure there's no people around that are killed by that and so on. So when, the head security person there says, pull it. What he meant by pull it, not pull the building down intentionally, but pull the first responders out of the building who were there fighting the fire before they get killed when it collapsed, and then it collapsed after that.
One of my friends showed me that. He's like, "How do you explain this?" I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
years later, I've read it in your book. I'm like, all right, that makes sense now.
Yeah, there's cool. I mean, the entire book could have just been 9/11 stuff, and there have been books written to debunk the 9/11 truth claims, because there's hundreds of them. There's whole books written about the conspiracy, inside job and all that. And, but you can only spend, it's the same thing with JFK. There are hundreds of these anomalies, and people like Gerald Posner, whose book Case Closed on Lee Harvey Oswald, and Vincent Bugliosi, whose book Reclaiming History, like 1,500 pages where he goes through every single JFK conspiracy theory there is. It's astonishing. There's hundreds of them. I mean, everybody was in on it, right? Except Lee Harvey Oswald, the actual shooter.
Yeah, in the book you talk about, and you kind of mentioned the tribal conspiracism, right? And you talk about proxy, tribal, and constructive conspiracism. Can you elaborate on those? What are we applying these terms to?
Yeah, I mentioned the tribal conspiracism regarding Trump and the rigged election conspiracy theory. People don't really know if it's true or not, but they just assume it must be because our tribe, our group, our political party, our religion, our ideology, whatever it is you believe. These never happen in a vacuum. There's always a social group that believes it with you. Otherwise, most people wouldn't get into any of this stuff, right? It gets reinforced through social networks and spread that way. And again, most of us don't have the resources to check on whether these things are true or not. So we depend on our tribal leaders to tell us what we're supposed to believe. It's not quite that blatant, but that is ultimately what happens. And that's true for everybody. I mean, I use examples like people that tick the box that they accept the theory of evolution is true. If you ask them, how do you think it works? How does natural selection work to create the evolution of species? Most people have no idea. They offer some Lamarckian explanation. Oh, the giraffe stretches its neck and the longer neck gets passed down to the offspring. No, that's incorrect, right? So when they're saying, I accept it, they're basically saying, I accept science. It's kind of I'm in the science tribe. I think scientists mostly get it right. They're wrong occasionally, but they correct themselves. And mostly, for the most part, you can trust it most of the time. So, I accept climate change. I accept vaccines. I accept the Big Bang Theory. I accept the theory of evolution, accept the germ theory of disease, whatever it is. Most people don't know much about it. So they accept it, or in the opposite vector, they reject it because their tribe rejects it. So it's very tribal that way. Proxy conspiracies are when the conspiracy theory is a stand-in for something else. So my type specimen of that is the OJ trial. OJ Simpson was acquitted of murdering his wife and her friend, Ron Goldman, and everybody knew he did it. I mean, it was obvious he did it. And yet the jury acquitted based on a conspiracy theory that the LAPD planted the bloody glove, they planted the blood splatter drops, and so forth. And the jury accepted that conspiracy theory. But it's not completely irrational for African Americans in Southern California, particularly Los Angeles, to have had considerable experience with the LAPD that's not good. That, in fact, police have and do plant evidence. They've been caught doing this. And they do it for various reasons they think is noble or whatever, but they still do it. So to African Americans in 1994, 95, during that trial, and here I reference in the book a ESPN documentary series called OJ in America. And it's an eye opener. It spends an entire episode on the relationship between the African American community in LA, going all with the police, going all the way back to the 1950s, post World War II migration of blacks to Southern California. And it's pretty bad. I mean, the racism was bad. Many racial incidents, way worse than anything we experience today. And so you kind of, it's not just sympathize with the African American jurors, but understand there's a kind of rationality behind it, a proxy rationality, proxy conspiracism. It's a stand-in for something that could, it's the kind of thing the LAPD would do, even if they didn't do it in this particular case. That's how I portray it. Or the Pizzagate, that, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats and running this secret satanic pedophile ring out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. Who in their right mind would believe something that crazy? I mean, it's just insane. I mean, what are you talking about? Secret satanic pedophile ring drinking the blood of children? What? But one guy believed it, Edgar Welch. He went there with his gun to shoot up the place. And he told us he made a video driving there. It was like a 3-hour drive to get to this place. He left a video for his family. I'm going in. I'm doing this because it's the right thing. I'm going to break up this criminal ring. No one's doing anything about it. For most people, I think if you took them there and, like with Edgar Welch, and said, look, there's no basement, there's no pedophile rings, people eating pizza. And he's like, oh no, and then he went to jail, and he's like, that was the dumbest thing I've ever done. But it's not like people that you would show that is incorrect. There is no pedophile ring. They're not going to then turn and go, well, in that case, I'll vote for Hillary. They were never going to vote for Hillary, right? They don't like the Democrats. They hate the Clintons. They don't trust the liberals. We're going to own the libtards, all that politicized stuff. So the Pizzagate conspiracy theory is a proxy for something else, distrust of liberals, Democrats, the Clintons, whatever. And a lot of conspiracy theories are like that.
What is the most famous conspiracy, and what is the most famous conspiracy theory?
Well, okay. The most famous conspiracy theories are the ones I deal with in the book, QAnon, Obama birthers, 9/11 truthers, JFK, the big ones, QAnon, deep state, all that stuff. The real ones, though, are pretty interesting just from American history alone. MK Ultra, the CIA's mind control program to use U.S. citizens without their consent or knowledge even in mind control experiments, including giving them LSD. Frank Olson being the famous case of the CIA agent who was dosed with LSD and subsequently died. He jumped out of, or fell out of, or maybe he was pushed from a New York high-rise, 13th floor, and died on impact. And because maybe he knew too much, who knows? But there's a lot of cases regarding MK Ultra that we would today find abhorrent. Or Tuskegee, right, withholding medical treatments of African Americans for syphilis. Just to see what the progress of the disease would be. It's the kind of thing the Nazis did, that we put them on trial for war crimes at Nuremberg. And our own government was doing these sorts of things. It's astonishing. And related to that, Operation Paperclip. That is to say, our absconding with Nazi scientists to work for the United States government before the Russians got them. This post-World War II, right in 1945. We kind of swept in and tried to get as many of the biologists, chemists, and physicists as we could, rocket scientists, engineers, and so forth, to work on our weapons programs, not just the space race with Werner von Braun, but there's hundreds and hundreds of these scientists we got, including those that are making like sarin gas, chemical weapons, biological weapons, germ warfare. and so on. That we were on the one hand trying some of these Nazi scientists for war crimes, and on the other hand hiring them to work for us. Right? I mean, it's like, what? Our government was doing this, or Operation COINTELPRO by the FBI to spy on U.S. citizens who were part of what we would today call social justice groups or civil rights groups, including Martin Luther King Jr., who they tried to blackmail. And many of these civil rights meetings were infiltrated by FBI agents to spy on them, and not just spy on them to gather information, but to also make them look bad, to actually do things to make their group look bad, and therefore not garner as much support from the American public. And the Pentagon Papers about to what extent Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon administration were lying to the American public, lying to Congress about how the war in Vietnam was going. The Afghanistan Papers, same thing, how the war was going in Afghanistan. Again, Rumsfeld and the Bush administration and the Obama administration also lying to Congress, lying to the American public about how the war was going in Afghanistan. WikiLeaks and all the way up to the most recent leaks, or any of the kind of Freedom of Information Act documents that have been obtained by persistent journalists, reveal a lot of things that are surprising that our government was doing. Assassinating foreign leaders, rigging elections in foreign countries to get the fascist dictator to win the election over the communist dictator, because at least the fascists will do business with American corporations, whereas the communist dictators, when they get in power, they just nationalize the companies and just take what they want.
And which country you're talking about?
South American countries mostly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, like Bolivia was one. I think was it the American Fruit Company. Was that Bolivia? I think it was Bolivia, where the American Fruit Company is a large corporation doing business, American corporation doing business there. And but the fear is, well, if the communist dictator wins the election, then they may nationalize the company. So we got to help the other dictator. That's where the phrase "he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch" comes from, right? So there's a lot of that goes on, absolutely. So when people say, "I don't really trust the government," it's like, I understand. I don't always trust them either, right? That's why we need checks and balances.
And speaking of the deep state conspiracy theory, which you actually, it's one of the few that you actually don't dig into in the book. Can we discuss that? Because what is that theory is about?
Yeah, we can discuss it because it's actually in the book a lot, but not by name, because
gotcha.
Most of conspiracy theories post World War I are related to the deep state or the government. That's a new term, but just distrust of the government.
Okay.
Before World War I, and especially before World War II, the belief by conspiracy theorists is that there were some outside groups that were doing things to conspire to harm Americans. The Jews, the Catholics, the Mormons, the communists. Somebody out there, an enemy from without, is trying to harm us, or immigrants. They're trying to come here, whatever. After World War I, particularly with the revelations about to what extent arms manufacturers wanted to get us in the war conflict so they can make money, or there were geopolitical reasons for us to get involved by the U.S. government and so on. After that, and particularly after World War II, the focus of the conspiracism shifted to the United States government protecting us from these outside agitators, to the U.S. government itself becoming the conspiracists, that they were the enemy and we have to watch out for them. So if you look at conspiracy theories in the 1950s and 1960s, they're very much distrustful of the U.S. government. And you can see why in polls that track Americans' trust in the government. And it just plummets particularly after Watergate. It's just terrible. And all the way to today. I mean, if recent polls show that Americans don't trust Congress. They don't trust the president. And, the left doesn't trust, when Trump was in power, the right doesn't trust Biden. I mean, it's still going on. So that's in a way, it's a kind of a deep state. And the theory is that there are operatives deep inside the state that are doing things that are bad. Now, the specific ones about like Pizzagate or whatever, that's not, those aren't popular, but more to the extent, like, why are we supporting Ukraine, to pull an example off the front page of today's paper, any day's paper for the last year? What are we doing there? This isn't our business. Why are we supporting Ukraine? Or previously, what were we doing in Afghanistan? What were we doing in Iraq? How come America is involved in all these foreign wars? It's just endless. We're always, we have like 900 military bases around the world. We're everywhere. Why are we doing that? So, understandably, there's a kind of rationality to not really accepting that on face value. There must be something else going on there. And often there is, right? Maybe things that you and I don't need to know about because they're national secrets having to do with protecting American interests in the Middle East, whatever that, we just don't need to know about, which is why, with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, the concern of the State Department is that they were leaking things that we're doing that we'd rather our allies not know what we're doing for national security reasons, for geopolitical reasons, whatever the reason. We have spies in some of these countries. We have operatives working there under pseudonyms and so on. And if they're exposed, they could be killed.
In the book, you rate the conspiracy theories from 1 to 10, 1 being like somewhat possible and 10 being like bonkers with those lizards, I think. As you were looking through conspiracy theories through your career, have you actually shifted from one end to another, either direction? Like
it depends on the conspiracy theory and how much I know about it. In general, I try to keep an open mind just in case, because you never know what's going to be revealed. It's like, oh, I didn't know we were doing that. Okay, well, then in that case, I changed my mind. I'm very Bayesian in that sense. That is, I never put a prior of 0 or 100 in the equation of how likely it is or isn't to be true. Because you never know. I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything, and you don't either. So we have to keep an open mind and look at the evidence for each one in a particular case. That said, on kind of the face value or prima facie evaluation of the conspiracy theory, the lizard aliens are running the royal family. It's like, okay. The chance of this, okay, I won't put a 0 on it. I'll put a 0.0001% likelihood of being true. But very, very unlikely. I don't have to waste a lot of time investigating it. Like UFOs, are they aliens? Are they secret Russian or Chinese drones? Very, very probably not, for reasons I've outlined in great extent in articles. Not 0, could be, but very, very unlikely. So keep an open mind just in case, but I don't need to spend a lot of time, looking at the nth blurry video, grainy photograph, just when you have something good, really clear and unmistakable. My latest example is the Chinese spy balloon. There it is. Everybody knows it. There it is. We can see it. It's photographed and shot down. We have the debris. No one is talking about the Chinese spy balloon based on testimonies from people who said they saw this thing. I don't have to depend on testimonies. I've seen it myself in the photographs. The State Department showed us what, the jets flew up there and took pictures of it from above, shooting down, and then they shot it down. And we see pictures of the debris on the ship that they went out and got it. Okay. There's no question about it. 100% Chinese spy balloon is real. That's what I want for UFOs, as aliens or some super advanced Chinese technology. If that's true, then let me see the photographs. And then what people show me are these grainy photographs and blurry videos. It's like, come on, really? That's the best you have? I was listening to this guy, James C. Fox, on Rogan this week. And he's got a new documentary about first contact. We have the evidence. We have the evidence. You're just not going to believe it. It's like, okay, is this video or what's it's this credible video. Is it in the film? No. Well, have you seen it? Well, I saw a kind of degraded VHS copy of the video from the 1990s. Well, where's the original? We don't know where the original is. The guy who says he had it gave it to some guy living in a trailer park. Okay, where is this trailer park? Where's the guy? I don't know. Really? That's the evidence for first contact with alien? This is it? Come on. I mean, it's just... Okay, I want to believe, but I don't want to believe in things that have to be believed in to be true. I just want, come on, give us the evidence. If you don't have it, well, that's okay too. But anyway, so frustrating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When I was growing up, as you said, I saw these grainy pictures of UFOs, and I wanted to believe. Now everyone has a very good quality camera in their pocket, and those pictures are still grainy. What's going on? Can somebody figure out how to use it?
Yeah, a real eye opener for me was that is it pilot David Fravor, or was it
Yeah, yeah.
the other
Uh-huh.
one? He was on 60 Minutes with Bill Whitaker, the correspondent, and Bill Whitaker asks him, how often do you see these things? He goes, oh, every day. They're all over the place, around the base, along the coast, out in the ocean, over the beach. It's like, hang on, there are millions of people with these high resolution 4G cameras that can film everything in high definition. Where are the photos of these things that everybody's seeing every day? There are none. Zero. End of story. You don't have anything.
Well, you're a skeptic. That's why you started Skeptic Society and the Skeptic magazine. Tell me a little bit about them. What are you skeptical about?
Oh, well, here I'll show you. Here's our latest issue here. There it is. Beautifully redesigned.
That's
Four
nice.
color four color throughout. Let me see. You got four color throughout. Beautiful paper. My business partner right there. Oh, you can't quite see that. Anyway, we started this magazine in 1992. It's a quarterly publication of the Skeptic Society. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. And science education is our thing, our mission, critical thinking, rationality, science, reason. To what extent can we examine any claim that anyone makes about anything? Now, some claims, we don't have anything to say about, mostly personal experiences people have that can't be verified, but we are interested in why people believe the personal experiences they have. And to that extent, we cover a lot of psychology of belief, sociology of belief, anthropology of belief, and so on. But our mission is just to take, each issue has a particular theme to it. Like the last year, we've done trans issues, abortion, race, nationalism, economics. Our next one is on energy. What about nuclear power? Why don't we have more nuclear power? What are the arguments for and against? So mostly we try to line up the claims. Here's what the claims are being made. Holocaust deniers or creationists or climate skeptics or vaccine skeptics or whatever. And let's see what the science actually says. To the extent that we have scientific consensus, then we want to put it out there for people to know. So that's our mission.
Who does that research? You have a team of people?
Well, I have a team of editors. Most of the content is produced by outside sources, writers, scholars, scientists, academics, professional writers, journalists, and so on. They submit stuff to me, and I send it to my team to read, like any journal, evaluate, peer review. We don't have an official peer review system, but we do put it through fairly rigorous review before we publish something.
So next time you hear something about Oracle who can predict future, you're gonna test a person. Is it what you do?
The Oracle. Maybe it'll be ChatGPT, GPT-4, GPT 4.5, GPT-5. Yeah, I don't know. Again, that's another one of these claims we've been covering. Is this the end of the world? To me, the whole thing sounds like a doomsday cult, which never happens, right? So, maybe this is the time. This is it. It's different now. Maybe, but probably not. And the singularity is coming. The singularity has been coming for the last 30 years. Computers are going to achieve human level consciousness and sentience and so on. I've been hearing this since the 90s. Okay, maybe it's going to happen. Maybe, but maybe not. And even if it does, maybe it's the end of the world, but maybe it's not. Probably not, given history and how complex things are, and so on. But again, try to keep an open mind.
But have you covered ChatGPT in your magazine already or not yet?
No, not in the magazine, not in print, because it's so new and we're only quarterly. But we do have some content coming out on that. No, but I've had a couple of podcast guests. David Brin, who's a science fiction writer and a computer scientist, and engineer, physicist, and so on. He's on top of all these things. And Kevin Kelly, the co-founder of Wired magazine, who is still their chief, whatever he calls himself. He has one of those fun names, titles, but basically he's into all this AI. This is what he does. And neither one of them are in the least bit worried. I mean, maybe tiny bit, but they articulate on my show, the Michael Shermer Show, why it's very, very unlikely to be doomsday.
Mm-hmm. And if you were to write something about this, that's how you approach it, right? You reach out to the people who are expert in the field, and you talk to
Hmm.
them, and
Hmm.
then you run it by some other folks to
Exactly.
confirm.
Exactly.
I saw your TED talk. I think it's from a few years back, and there is one funny. It's pretty funny in general, but there is one part where Led Zeppelin is playing, right, and then you're playing it back, and there is a whole bunch of interesting stuff going on. Where did you find that music? Like, how did people even discover it?
There are whole web pages devoted to it's called backward masking. So it started with rock songs from the 70s. If you play them backwards, you'll hear the secret satanic message that the rockers are trying to embed in there to corrupt the American youth, right? I mean, that was at the time mostly conservatives who were worried about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the corruption of the American youth, and so forth. And so that derived from that. And then, from there, you could play speeches backwards. If you can play any tape backwards, and it's mostly just mumbo jumbo. It's just sounds. But by accident, there will be some that sort of sound like words, especially if you're primed to hear them. And there's now a whole book on this that I blurbed called "Turn Me On Dead." Is it "Turn Me On, Dead Man"? Well, yeah, I think that. Yeah, no. Is it the Led Zeppelin backwards is Satan 666 and the Tool Shed. Yeah, I think the book was titled "Turn Me On, Dead Man," because there, if you play the Beatles' White Album Revolution #9 backwards and forward, it says, number nine, number nine, number nine. I think it's John Lennon saying that. If you play it backwards, it goes, "Turn me on, dead men, turn me on, dead men, turn me on, dead men." So it was like, aha, they're talking about the death of Paul McCartney, and there's a whole bunch of cues. It's what I call patternicity, trying to find meaningful patterns in random noise. If you look at the back of the Abbey Road album cover, there's little clues on there, like the license plate on the little Volkswagen in the background says 28 if, 28 if, 28 if. Paul would have been 28 if he hadn't died. And there's just, hundreds of clues like this. So this whole web page is dedicated to it. You can play hundreds of songs and speeches backwards, and they tell you what you're supposed to hear. So this is the thing. It's called priming. I tell you what it is you're supposed to hear, then you hear it. If I don't tell you what you're going to hear, it's really hard to hear clearly what the secret message is.
And it's interesting, like even in that TED talk, you played the music first. Yeah, I heard the word Satan, but then you actually showed the text, and I start hearing the stuff that you were shown on the screen. I'm like, yeah, that's. So is it how our brain works? Is it?
Yes, correct. With degraded information where you can't quite hear or see what it is you're supposed to see, then somebody priming you, essentially they're giving you a pattern that you're supposed to look for and find. It's much easier when you have in mind something you're supposed to hear or see. And that's how a lot of these optical illusions work. Once you know what you're supposed to hear, then you hear it. And otherwise, it's hard to hear. And anyway, so I find that incredibly interesting because it shows, to what extent we're really in touch with the real world accurately, not always. And so it's good to be careful about what you're extremely confident in knowing, because maybe you don't, maybe you're deluded, all of us.
I think you wrote the article back in the day called "How to Think Like a Scientist." How to think like a scientist.
Well, you start off skeptical. That is, scientists are naturally skeptical because most hypotheses put forth by fellow scientists are not true. They're just spitballing ideas. Who knows? We have to run some experiments, collect some more data, update our priors, and so on. And that's how scientists really work. So it's not that science is conservative, cautious, that is, because it's distrusting, or they're flatlanders, they're dogmatic, they never change their minds. No, that's not it at all. It's that most ideas are wrong, including ideas by scientists. So science has this built-in self-correcting machinery, the whole peer review system, the replication process, corroboration process. You have lots of fact checkers and other people involved in the research with you, trying to replicate what you did in great detail. That's why you write about that in these papers. Here's my methodology. Here's exactly what I did, and so forth. And all that is because of human error and bias and just expectations and all that comes into play even for scientists. Nothing special about scientists as people, although they are trained to try not to let those things happen. But they're like anybody, they get committed to their beliefs. and they're therefore likely to employ the confirmation bias, where they look for and find confirming evidence for their theory and ignore or rationalize away the disconfirming evidence. The problem is, if you don't find it, somebody else will. So hopefully most scientists are motivated to not fall into the trap of the confirmation bias. Motivated reasoning is the larger process there. And so, I mean, the replication crisis that happened started in 2008 and is still ongoing, really. That some non-trivial percentage, like maybe half, a third to half of all scientific experiments never replicated. Mostly psych experiments, social psych experiments, cognitive psych experiments, and a lot of medical experiments never replicated because they're very complex, and they're hard to do, particularly the medical ones, but some of the psych ones are pretty simple to do. But because they're kind of eye-catching, like the power pose. There was a TED Talk. Amy Cuddy gave this power pose talk, seen by tens of millions of people. It's one of the most watched TED Talks, that women just need to have this power pose, shoulders back, chin up, walk with confidence, and your testosterone will go up and more likely to get the raise, and people will be impressed with you anyway. This failed to replicate. And there's dozens like that, famous experiments, where like if you're at the top of the escalator and you ask people for money, they'll give more money than if you're at the bottom of the escalator. If your desk is a mess or it's clean, that affects how much money you donate to charities, things like that. They just never replicated. They probably should have never been published in the first place. And part of the problem is leading journals don't want to publish replication studies. They're not interesting. What they want is the new, cool, sexy finding that was surprising and wow, and then other people try to run the experiment. They do run the experiment and they can't get any results. And they go back to the journal and say, hey, we can't replicate this research. We don't think it's true. The journal's like, well, we're not interested. So this is a problem in science, right? This is why scientists are now pretty skeptical of claims like that.
And this is how conspiracy theories are born, because they're fun, right? It's fun to
totally
to publish them. There's a lot of engagement. I haven't seen that Joe Rogan's episode that you mentioned, but without even seeing it, I'm pretty sure it's going to be very popular because it's talking about very cool thing, right?
Joe asked him, James Fox, to come on the show. This was, I think, it was, what's today, the 29th. I think they were on the 28th or 27th. They recorded that, so it's a couple of days ago. And, Joe loves the UFO stuff, but he was, to his credit, properly skeptical. Like, oh, I don't know. You saw only a degraded version, and the real version is where? Some guy gave it to somebody living in a trailer park somewhere. I mean, come on, really? Let's see this thing. And then this guy Fox, he's like on the Rogan show. The reason I want to come on is I want to do a call to people. If you know where this video is, or if you have any photos or videos that are clear, please send them to us. It's like, wait, you're the UFO expert, and you're just going on Joe Rogan to ask people to send you anything because you don't have anything. Essentially, that's right. And when I listen to this, I'll tell you, it's just so frustrating because I've been hearing this since we started in the early 90s. I've been here, disclosure of aliens coming any day now. It's been coming any day now for over 30 years.
When you started, it was a very different environment. Now you have social media when everyone can say whatever they want and it can be amplified. What's changed?
The speed and the depth at which these ideas spread. The ideas themselves are not new. I mean, there's always been conspiracy theories, again, back to where we started, going all the way back to ancient Rome. And people have always been suspicious and so on. But like the analogy I use, the JFK conspiracy theorists, they just used to meet in these tiny hotel conference rooms with a couple dozen people, and they got their mimeograph newsletters and self-published books, and that was it. They just couldn't reach that many people. They were always on the margins and in the fringe. And Oliver Stone kind of changed that with his 1993 drama JFK, and after that, the internet really comes online, and these things spread. There's web pages, and to their credit, there's web pages debunking Oliver Stone's film. Here are the 100 mistakes and lies and errors in the film JFK. You can look it up. So, again, the printing press people were concerned about that at the time. The same technology that can produce Mein Kampf can also produce Shakespeare. Well, you're going to get both, right? We're going to get on the internet, you're going to have fact-checking sites that are good, and you're going to have the wackadoodles out there promoting their crazy theories. That's also comes with the territory.
And how good were those fact-checking sites? Are they?
I think they're pretty good, like Snopes, my own skeptic.com. PolitiFact I like a lot, and there's like a dozen of these, and they're good. I mean, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, they all do fact checking. And although they have their slants, if there's studies showing that the actual news items in the Wall Street Journal versus the New York Times, you just open up and flip to some story. Here's what happened in Ukraine today, or here's what the stock market did yesterday. They're pretty much indistinguishable. It's mainly the opinion editorial pages that are radically different. So, but we know that that's not a conspiracy. It's not a secret. You if you flip open to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal op-eds, you know what you're going to get. So fair enough.
You've been looking at this type of stuff for your entire career. How has it been you going through life being very skeptical about everything?
I'm actually fairly open-minded about things. I change my mind about all sorts of things. Climate change, for example, gun control, abortion to a certain extent. I'm still pro-choice, but I'm a little more sympathetic to the pro-life arguments for various reasons. But I just want to know it's true. I'd rather not be dependent on my politics or religion, which is why the libertarian classical liberal that allows me to evaluate issues on their own instead of filtered through my party. I don't like the idea that if I know your position on abortion, I can tell what your position is going to be on gun control, immigration, foreign policy. I don't even know you. How is it I'm able to know that? That's not right. You should believe what you believe because of the arguments, not because I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative. That's why I believe X. That's a terrible reason to believe.
What about the climate change that you changed your mind about, and what's your take in general?
Well, I wasn't that committed to it, like in the 70s and 80s when the whole ecological movement came online, and I was in college and then a college professor, and I sort of tracked it just a little bit. And I thought, well, these doomsayers, they've been saying this for decades and nothing's bad's happening. The rainforests are going to disappear by the end of the 1980s. They didn't. Like the world's greener now than it's been in centuries. So it's like, okay, peak oil. Oh, we're going to run out of oil any day. No, that never happened. And it's not going to happen ever because as when oil really gets scarce, it'll just become so expensive, no one will use it. And, thanks to Elon Musk, we're shifting to electric cars. We do need nuclear to generate the electricity to power all those electric cars. And but that's a different subject. That's our energy issue, the next issue of Skeptic. But in terms of it being real and human caused, by the time I wrote about it in Scientific American in 2006, it was right after the 2006 TED conference that I went to, the first time I spoke there, when Al Gore spoke there. This is when it was in Monterey, California, and he gave his inconvenient truth talk before it was a movie. He had his PowerPoint slides or whatever. He used the other system, and he had all his bells and whistles. It was a great talk. It was incredible. It wasn't based on that talk. The talk led me to, well, I think I'll look into the primary literature here. What do the scientists say about this? And I went to climate scientists at Caltech and other places and said, okay, what's the story? What should I read? The good literature, primary literature, the real scientific literature, not the politicized either way, right? And then I decided, well, wow, boy, this is really happening and it's really human caused, and we should do something about it. Now, I'm still not a doomsdayer. The kind of Greta Thunberg, we got 12 years before it's all over. I don't see that. I just don't see it. But I also have vast experience with doomsday predictions that never come true. So I'm naturally skeptical about the next one, like with AI.